All right, everyone, it's time for strike two for Donald Trump. I do really mean that. The second time that he's proposed something that I absolutely can't go along with it. I have to openly oppose this one. And it involves Jeff Sessions and the DOJ, so that's like the icing on the cake of pissing me off. Now, generally, I'll say this again. With my presidential rankings video, I said Trump, ultimately I would put him down somewhere in the low teens, upper 20s as far as presidential greatness. I think he's a good president. Not great. He hasn't done anything other than tax reform. He hasn't done anything spectacular to differentiate himself. But he's nowhere near the bottom 10. They're trying to put him in dead last. It's like, come on. He's been in there for a year. You don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what group of morons you polled on this. There's no way you're going to convince me Trump is worse than Richard Nixon, George W., or Buchanan. No, it's absolutely not the case. Absolutely false. Any sane individual would know that. You can study political science, or you can know nothing about it, and you would still understand that by cracking open a fucking encyclopedia at some point. But Trump has now proposed something I can't go along. This is the second time. Since the strikes on that Syrian airbase, I definitely opposed that. Thought it was a terrible idea. I understood at the time, of course, it was a limited endeavor. It's not exactly a war, but it is an active war when you're bombing a military target in another country. You don't have permission to do so. And the reason for doing so was, pardon the pun, trumped up at the time. Oh, Assad gassed people. Well, no, Obama tried to make that argument. Very wisely, people rejected that argument because it wasn't clear that was the case. Then, of course, the UN comes out with a report saying it wasn't even substantiated. Well, yeah, probably he did, but we can't prove it. Then the second time around, they're like, oh, yeah, he gassed people the second time. Again, we don't have proof, but, this time it's different for some odd reason. You had the House of Commons, of course, voting down military action. At the time, it was a good thing. Democratic action in the Western world saved probably hundreds of thousands of lives, which would have been lost if we had started bombing Assad's forces. But now Trump is proposing something else that I can't get behind. So he directed Jeff Sessions, the DOJ, to take action on accessories to firearms like bump stocks, things related to bump stocks, in order to try to save lives. And he's like, well, we need to do something to have a measurable impact. Now, I'll make a few points here. Number one, the left's not going to go along with this being what you need to do. They'll say, okay, you've taken one step forward by their standards. Now take 10 more steps forward. We want expanded and universal background checks. We want no guns for people on the no-fly list. We want no guns for the mentally ill. We want no guns for people under a certain age. We want an end to reciprocal carry. We want an end to concealed and open carry in all states. We want to mandate gun safes, no more assault rifles, so-called. These are the things, they've argued for all of these things throughout time. Why the hell would you want to try to appease them? So number one, it's a stupid endeavor because it's not going to work. They'll give him lukewarm applause. It gets the monkey off his back of, oh, Trump is responsible for gun violence, a little bit, because now they're just going to rant about banning the AR-15. Number two, this isn't even constitutional. Absolutely not. Look, you're not even talking about firearms bans. You're talking about simple accessories that, by the way, a person could mill and make on their own anyway. What the hell effect is it going to have? We're not talking about banning any particular class of guns. We're talking about manufactured items. Well, it doesn't matter. Bump stock doesn't kill anyone unless you maybe beat him in the head with it. But again, bump stocks are a boogeyman. It's a spook at this point. Here's why. Bump stocks, we're talking about one mass shooting in recent memory that involves them. All of these other times just, oh, well, the evil AR-15 or, the evil fertilizer truck bomb in the case of, some of those very notorious attacks, especially in the 1990s. It's not going to save a single life. And by the way, the premise is wrong anyway. Trump's premise is completely wrong. So, well, we need to do something about, the shootings. Gun crime in this country is not high. Gun crime in this country is as low as it was in the happy days of the late nifty 50s, early swell 60s. The big gun crime problem we had was in the 80s and 90s. Through the mid and late 70s, it begins to soar. Up around the mid to late 90s, it peaks. In the early 2000s, it begins to decline. It's largely because of free speech on the internet, catharsis, and people able to intervene in one another's behavior, hopefully provide a moderating force. If you want to drive the crime rate down further, render the big tech sites public utilities, and then, don't tax or do anything else with them. Say they're public utilities. You can't ban people for anything that's not criminal. Leave it at that. That's number one. Number two, better mental health. Absolutely. You should definitely put more money into the mental health system. People shouldn't be, if someone's spazzing out, they shouldn't be left on the street corner. If somebody's having delusions, yeah, you should help them. Addiction treatment. Hell, the drug wars probably caused more death due to every kind of violent crime, as well as property crime in many cases, than anything else. And the drug war. You've got Jeff Sessions trying to reheat the drug war, and you're talking about wanting to stop violence. What the fuck good is that going to do? It's not going to do anything. The crime rate will probably rise. You do realize that, Mr. Trump. Attempting to do this while letting Sessions run roughshod over people's right to imbibe substances on their own property and get addiction treatment if those substances happen to be addictive. It's exactly the wrong way to go about things. You should be doing the opposite. Tell Jeff Sessions to shut up about weed. Let the states legalize it, and then go forth with, maybe decriminalizing some of those softer drugs. Allow people to, crush the cartels that way. And then go in the other direction on guns. You should be attempting to repeal existing gun control legislation. Like, there shouldn't be any restrictions on silencers, so-called, suppressors. Difference between the two. There's no silencer. You can suppress the sound so that you don't lose your hearing after a couple years of going to the range, but it's not a silent weapon. Let's not be lying to people and saying, even using that term. We should strike that from the human lexicon. If you want a silent weapon, okay, a crossbow. All right, well, that makes a knife. Yeah, there's a silenced weapon. A blowgun, maybe. No, that's not entirely silent either. It's just really, really quiet. You're 20 feet away from someone, they probably don't hear it. The poison darts already hit them. They didn't hear a thing. They didn't feel a thing either. They just slumped down onto the ground. The bump stock ban won't do anything. He'll probably get challenged in court and thrown out anyway. What's Trump trying to do? Piss off his core fan base? Doesn't make any sense to me. I'm supposing. Maybe he's putting it out there for A/B testing. Of course, Sarah Huckabee Sanders comes out and says, well, this is open to revision. We're pledged towards, trying to do something to stop gun crime, stop mass shootings, but this is still pliable, still malleable. My hope is that Trump took, the Rands aside, who otherwise would be livid, and said, don't worry, this is just a ploy. We need to distract the Democrats. We're going to say we're doing something, and then ultimately we're going to drag our heels till people forget about the issue and just sort of run out the clock, and then we'll move back towards things that we're actually willing to work on. That's my hope. But even bringing up the specter of increasing gun control, especially when you have a Republican administration or a Republican House and Senate, it's like, what the fuck is the point? People, yes, in the wake of a school shooting, people get outraged, and there is a huge chorus of people saying, well, guns are the problem. They never win, though, because most people are intelligent enough to deny that. Most people are intelligent enough to know that a gun on its own just sits there. Ultimately, it just fucking sits there. You need a psychopath or a criminal, a career criminal, or someone, in a moment of extreme anxiety or something, a crime of passion, to utilize that weapon in an offensive and illegal manner. And it's already against the law. It'd be nice if you could simply say, well, shooting people is illegal, and then shooting people stops happening. Not the real world. As long as there is that factor in the real world, people will want to be able to defend themselves. Banning bump stocks will keep bump stocks out of the hands of people who generally follow the law. It won't have any effect upon a psychopath who can mill it on their own anyway. They'll probably find instructions online, make it themselves. They'll have a much higher rate of fire now than anybody who might be firing back, including probably any police on the scene at first. That will be really funny. Oh, they're like sitting there in a hotel room in Vegas. Nobody's firing back. Nobody's going to do a damn thing. Because now there won't even be the possibility that people can effectively fight back. I absolutely oppose that. I totally oppose Trump on this. By the way, Sessions shouldn't even be in there. He should have been fired a long time ago. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's totally incompetent. He doesn't even understand marijuana. Most of us, we're living in the modern century. He's still he's at the dawn of the 1900s on these issues. So things, opium, you mean that thing that I get from Chinatown, says Jeff Sessions? Marijuana, the devil's weed, you need that stuff that you smoke and you run your car off the road and then try to rape your girlfriend and who otherwise would be chased. She's totally a virgin till marriage. Nobody ever had premarital sex in the 1920s. You mean that stuff that causes you to try to shoot your friend in a jealous rage or rob a bank because you smoked your inheritance? Yeah, come on. Yeah, I'm going to trust him when it comes to gun crime. All I have to do is go to the FBI crime stats page, and I can see the bump stock sort of related. Assault weapons. It's not even used in the majority of gun crime. Guns, less deadly than a lot of bladed and blunt instruments in many cases. A lot of gun crimes just suicide. A lot of these so-called school shootings are single actor. They involve accidental fire or suicide, or one person was injured, they're okay. The shooter was the only one that got killed. So what's the problem here? You can say, well, it's a horrible thing. School got shot. Yeah, it's a horrible thing. You're not going to be able to stop the occasional psychopath in society. We have a nation with hundreds of millions of people in it. There are a few bad eggs. It's unfortunate, but it's true. No, you are not 100% safe everywhere you go. If you're in an area where there are no other people for miles, you're safe. You're safer around wild animals, bears and tigers and shit than you are, statistically, around human beings. The only exception, of course, being the Anopheles mosquito, which kills more people than humans. It's actually more deadly than us. We are essentially, think about it this way. Humans are just an offshoot of the same lineage that gives rise to our more hairy cousins, the chimpanzees. And you look at how they behave, and sometimes they snap and they beat each other up. Sometimes they attack another tribe, often with little to no provocation. They'll occasionally rip one of their members limb from limb. They'll take their leader, the alpha ape, and they'll team up and they'll bash his skull in with a rock. Yeah, humans do stupid shit sometimes. We're marginally more advanced than a chimpanzee, and we're less hairy. That's what we are. We're a monkey, basically. We're a type of ape. Human beings are basically ape-like creatures. It'd be wonderful if we stemmed off from the primordial lineage of bonobos instead, because then we'd solve our problems primarily by getting one another off. Yeah, that happens relatively less commonly, especially in urban scenarios. I think there's a difference. The inner chimpanzee comes out more in cities. Like people that road rage, shootings and stuff. Out in the countryside, it's more like bonobo land, I guess. Something like that. Something along those lines. Yeah. But no, I don't think that we need to ban bump stocks. It's just bullshit. It's like saying, well, if we only got rid of suppressors, crime would go down. No, it wouldn't. If we only got rid of this one type of weapon, the AR-15 is like the boogeyman of the entire left, crime would magically go down. No, it wouldn't. No, those crimes would be conducted with other firearms. And then when you say, well, we need to ban the next most effective firearm, another one would be used, and so on down the line. Eventually be fertilizer bombs. And then once you lock up all the fertilizer, they'd get some sort of, a crossbow that's crank operated and semi-automatic or something. That's what would end up happening, honestly. There's no way to stop psychopaths from being psychopaths. There's knife attacks in China, 20, 30 people injured and killed. Yeah, and that's with knives, not with firearms. You don't hear about many shootings in China because simply owning a gun over there is a big no-no unless you're in the military or a high-ranking commie party official. Then you can defend your homeland. Otherwise, you'd be fighting with a stick, basically, or baseball bat. Be funny, invading China would be a lot easier despite its much higher manpower count than invading the United States just because of civilian firearms. Look, having firearms... Look, here's the thing. We have instances like in war, where a soldier will randomly toss a grenade into the commander's tent or go crazy and kill a whole village. Despite this fact, I don't hear the left saying, oh, well, soldiers shouldn't be able to carry their firearms around unless they're in an active combat. They should have to keep them locked up. The commander has the only key, and he has to open it up so the soldiers can get their weapons to go do soldiering stuff. That doesn't happen. So why are you constantly talking about the fact that civilians supposedly, they shouldn't be able to own weapons? What's the difference? So what's the fucking difference? One of these groups has been trained to kill people. I would think that'd be a more compelling reason to say, well, when you're on domestic soil, maybe not have a weapon. Nobody's going to make that argument because it's a dumb argument. Now, so is the argument that banning bump stocks is going to stop a single crime. It's not going to stop any crime. It's not going to do anything. And the AR-15, the civilian version that people buy, is not a military weapon anyway. A lot of people think it's the same as, the Armalite rifle developed for the U.S. military, and it turns into, the M16 is it's not the same fucking gun. It doesn't have selective fire. Putting a bump stock on it, okay, well, it's got a higher rate of fire. There are other modifications you can make to do the same thing. You can modify it yourself. So what are they saying? You can't sell bump stocks. Okay. Can you mill them on your own? No. What's going to stop a person from 3D printing one? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. In this era, it's going to be impossible consistently to disarm people anyway. This isn't the past, back when there were a handful of gun manufacturers. Now people can manufacture their own weapons easily using a press they can assemble from plans online. Yeah, good luck trying to ban any of these things. It's never going to happen. You're just going to ensure that criminals have more firepower than the law-abiding. That's about all.